It started like an ordinary morning in a quiet neighborhood just outside Atlanta. The sun was barely peeking through the pine trees, the streets still damp with dew. Birds chirped lazily on telephone wires, and the occasional bark from a dog hinted that the world was waking up. But what happened next would shake that calm street to its core and ripple across the country. 81-year-old Harold James, a retired U.S. Marine and Korean War veteran, slowly stepped outside his modest brick home. He always liked to start his day early, take in the morning air, and water the roses his late wife Mary had planted decades ago. The neighbors knew him as Mr. Harold, a soft-spoken, respectful man who saluted everyone, even kids riding bikes. His service cap was always perched firmly on his head, his back straight, his pride still intact. That morning he was wearing his old Marine jacket, the one with faded medals and patches that held more history than any book ever could. He leaned over to adjust a stubborn sprinkler head when the sound of tires crunching gravel made him look up. A police cruiser slowed to a stop at the curb. Two uniformed officers stepped out. At first, Harold thought nothing of it. He gave them a nod, lifting two fingers in a quiet greeting. But the officers didn't return the gesture. Instead, they exchanged a look. "What's your business out here this early?" one of them asked, his tone clipped. Harold straightened, confused. "Just watering my roses, sir. Is there a problem?" The second officer scoffed. "Got a call about suspicious activity in the area. You live here?" "I've lived here for 53 years, Harold said, his voice calm but firm. "This is my home. Mine showing ID. I can get it. Inside." Harold turned slowly toward his front door. But before he could take a step, the taller officer blocked him. "Stay where you are." Something shifted in the air. The tension was sharp now, buzzing like static. Harold's heart beat a little faster. He'd lived through war. He'd faced worse. But something about the way they were looking at him now, it didn't feel right. "I'm just trying to cooperate," he said softly. Then things escalated. One of the officers, muttering something under his breath, pulled out a can of red spray. Paint. Harold didn't even realize what was happening until he felt a cold mist hit the back of his head. "What are you doing?" he shouted, jerking away. But it was too late. They had sprayed words, ugly, hateful words, across his head and jacket. Slurs, insults, accusations that had no place on the back of a man who had risked his life for the very country they claimed to protect. Harold stood frozen, trembling, not from fear but disbelief. "Consider this a warning," one of the officers sneered. "Next time we won't be so nice." And with that, they got back into the cruiser and drove off as if nothing had happened. Across the street, a curtain dropped silently. Someone had seen, but no one came forward. No one opened their door. Harold stood alone, the red paint dripping, slowly onto the sidewalk. Back inside the house, his trembling hands reached for the phone. Not to call the police again, not after that. He called his son, Michael. Michael James was a corporate attorney in D.C., known for his calm demeanor and fierce dedication to justice. But when he heard his father's voice, quieter than usual, cracked in the middle, something broke in him. "I'll be there tonight, Dad." Michael's flight landed just after sunset. The next morning, he was standing in his childhood driveway, staring at the same red paint that hadn't completely washed away, despite his father's best efforts. His jaw clenched. He knocked on his father's door, and when Harold answered, Michael pulled him into a hug. The kind of hug that said, "I've got you now." But just as Michael was about to take action, call some people, file reports, make noise, another story unfolded just blocks away. A seemingly unrelated act of kindness that would tie into Harold's story in a way no one could have predicted. That same morning, on a crowded city bus headed toward the downtown medical district, a young black teenager named Jalen was quietly seated near the front. His headphones were in, but he kept the volume low enough to be aware of his surroundings. That's how he noticed her. A pregnant white woman, maybe in her 30s, looking exhausted and holding onto the rail, trying to balance herself as the bus jolted forward. Jalen glanced around. No one moved. Without a second thought, he stood up and offered his seat. "Ma'am, you can sit here." She looked surprised, then grateful. Thank you so much." As she sat down, she studied him, noticed the worn backpack, the faded sneakers, the thoughtful eyes. She smiled. "You remind me of someone," she said softly. Jalen nodded, politely, and looked away. But just before she got off at her stop, she turned back to him and handed him a folded piece of paper. "Please read this when you're alone." And then she was gone. Jalen opened the note on the way home. What he read made him stop walking, made him sit on a bench, and made him question everything he thought he knew about fate, timing, and the people we're meant to meet, because the note contained a name he didn't recognize but would soon never forget. And that name was Harold James. What connection could a pregnant woman have to an elderly veteran who was just humiliated? In his own yard? Why had she given Jalen this note at all? What did it mean? And why did Jalen feel like his next step mattered more than anything he'd ever done before? The answer would unravel secrets buried deep in that small town. And it would lead to a confrontation no one saw coming. But it all started with that spray can, and a son who refused to stay silent. And just as Michael James stepped out of his father's house, phone in hand, ready to make the first call that would set everything in motion, he saw something on the front porch. A folded note, handwritten, signed, by someone neither he nor his father had ever met. But the message was clear. Your story's not over yet, and neither was the fight. Michael stood there staring at the note for a long time, his mind racing. He turned it over as if hoping the paper would explain itself. It was on plain white stationery, creased and slightly smudged from travel. The handwriting was neat, but rushed, almost like the writer didn't have much time. He opened it slowly. "I saw what they did to your father. I want to help. Don't trust the local police. There's more to this. Meet me at Riverside Park by the bench near the Veterans Memorial. Noon. Come alone." There was no name, no signature, just the careful strokes of someone who clearly knew something they weren't supposed to. Michael reread the note, then folded it neatly and slid it into his jacket pocket. He looked out toward the street. Everything looked normal. Mail truck across the road, kids biking by. But now even the breeze felt suspicious. Inside, his father sat quietly at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee he hadn't touched. "Dad," Michael said softly, "did anyone else come by this morning, leave anything?" Harold shook his head. "No. You're the only person who's knocked." Michael didn't want to worry him more than necessary, so he just nodded and poured himself a glass of water. But something in his gut told him this wasn't just about two rogue officers. It was deeper, coordinated, maybe even covered up. Back in the city, Jalen was also trying to make sense of what had happened. The pregnant woman's note was still clutched in his hoodie pocket. He had read it at least 5 times now, and each time it seemed stranger. The handwriting was the same as the one Michael found, tight, slanted, slightly hurried. And like Michael, Jalen had no clue who Harold James was or why this woman wanted him to get involved. But something about her, her eyes, her urgency, her kindness, made him feel like this wasn't a random act, that it mattered, maybe even more than he could imagine. Jalen had never been one to get caught up in drama. He kept to himself, helped his mom when he could, and stayed focused on school. But this felt different, like a puzzle that somehow involved him. And he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening to this Harold guy wasn't isolated. He pulled out his phone and searched the name, Harold James, Georgia veteran. A few results popped up. An old newspaper article about Harold receiving a community service award in the 90s. Another was a black and white photo of him in uniform. But nothing recent. Nothing about the incident with the police. That's when Jalen realized there was no news, no reports, no outrage. It had been buried. Back at the house, Michael waited until the clock struck 11 before heading out. He didn't tell his father about the note. Not yet. He didn't want to raise false hopes, but in his gut he felt the weight of it. Whoever left that message knew something. something the local authorities weren't saying. Riverside Park was just a 15-minute drive away. It used to be a place where families picnicked and kids played tag in the summer. But lately, it had grown quieter. The city had redirected funds, the benches were starting to rust, and the once pristine memorial now had cracks along its base. Michael parked a few blocks away and walked the rest, eyes scanning every corner. He reached the bench near the memorial. 5 minutes early, sat down, waited. No one showed. 15 minutes passed, 20, 30. He was just about to leave when a small envelope slid across the bench beside him. He turned fast, but the person had already disappeared behind the trees. All he saw was the back of a navy blue hoodie. The envelope had one word on it: truth. Inside was a photo, grainy, but clear enough to make out. It showed the two officers, who had spray-painted his father, but they weren't in uniform. They were in plain clothes, standing in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, shaking hands with a man Michael didn't recognize, but who gave off the air of power, influence, control. On the back of the photo were coordinates. Michael's breath caught in his throat. He looked around again. No one. Why would someone go through all this trouble just to help them anonymously? Who was this woman? Why was Jalen, a random teenager, brought into the loop? As these questions swirled miles away, that same pregnant woman stood in front of a glass building, looking up at her reflection. She pulled her coat tighter around her belly and whispered something to herself. It's almost time. Inside the building, a conference room buzzed with quiet conversation. People in suits moved around as if nothing unusual was happening. But behind a locked door in the back, a folder with Harold James's name on it sat on a desk, marked classified. Back in town, Jalen made a decision. He couldn't just sit around wondering. He had to act. He printed the article he found on Harold and decided to visit the neighborhood where he lived. Maybe he'd see something. Maybe he'd find out why this woman trusted him of all people. As he approached Harold Street, he kept his head down, hoodie up, trying not to look out of place. But the tension was noticeable. Neighbors eyed him suspiciously. A white truck slowed when it passed him, then sped up. He turned a corner and saw it, Harold's house, and sitting on the porch sipping tea was Michael. Jalen hesitated, then stepped forward. Michael looked up, cautious at first. You don't know me, Jalen said quickly. But I think I have something to show you. Michael stood slowly. Who sent you? Jalen pulled out the folded note. She gave me this. Said it would matter. Michael took the paper, unfolded it, and his eyes widened. It was the same handwriting. He looked at Jalen again. Not a random kid. A missing piece. The air between them felt electric, like something big was just under the surface, ready to burst. Inside the house. Harold stirred from the table, sensing voices. He peeked out the window. He saw his son talking to a teenager he'd never met, and for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope. But none of them knew the truth yet, that the man in the warehouse was watching, and he wasn't finished.